The waitress took a job serving at an upscale party in a fancy mansion and froze when she saw her childhood photo displayed in a black frame. I woke up early like I always do. Soft morning sunlight slipped through the thin curtains of my modest bedroom, covering the few possessions I had with a gentle, golden shine. The familiar scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen, calming me. Today was shaping up to be another long one. I had a shift at the diner later, but before that, there were errands to run, bills that needed paying, and my younger sister to look after. Life wasn't exactly easy for me. At 23 years old, I'd gotten used to constantly working. There wasn't much time left to chase after dreams or think about things I might want. Between shifts at the diner, occasional odd jobs, and helping my adoptive mother at home, I barely had a moment for anything else. But I didn't complain. We had a roof over our heads, and even though we weren't rich, my family always made sure there was food on the table. My adoptive mother, Susan, had raised my sister and me since we were infants, showering us with love despite the struggles. As I got dressed, my mind wandered a bit. Today was slightly unusual. I'd been offered a gig working as a server at a fancy party downtown, something I didn't usually get to do. The pay was much better than my usual shifts at the diner. Even though it was just a one-time thing, it would cover this month's rent and maybe even give me a little extra breathing room for once. Still, the thought of stepping into such a glamorous setting made me nervous. Rich and influential people lived a life completely foreign to me. The mansion belonged to the Harrington family, a name everyone in Chicago knew. They were wealthy, powerful, and mysterious. There were plenty of rumors about how they'd accumulated their fortune and maintained their influence over the years, but that world felt distant, almost unreal to me. It was something I thought I'd never come close to. "Are you sure about this, Emily?" Susan asked as she handed me my bag. "It's going to be a long night. And those wealthy folks, they're not always nice." I smiled, trying to reassure her. "It'll be okay, Mom. It's just one night, and the extra money will really help." Susan's expression softened, but worry still filled her eyes. "Just be careful, sweetheart. People like that have secrets." After a quick hug, I stepped outside into the fresh morning air. The sun was shining brighter now, and for a moment, a small wave of optimism washed over me. Maybe today would be a step in the right direction, a brief escape from my exhausting routine. By the time I reached the Harrington mansion, the sun was beginning to set, casting shadows on the massive, intimidating estate. Luxurious cars lined the lengthy driveway, and classical music softly filled the air from inside. The house itself screamed of the family's wealth, with polished marble floors, huge columns, and chandeliers glittering like diamonds. I felt incredibly small stepping inside, joining the other workers busy preparing for the event. "Welcome to the Harrington estate," one coordinator announced, his voice crisp and formal. "We expect absolute perfection from everyone tonight." I nodded quietly, feeling the pressure build instantly. I was here to do a job, not to admire the lavishness around me. Staying focused was essential. As the evening wore on, I moved through the grand ballroom, offering drinks and appetizers to wealthy guests. My eyes couldn't help but wander, absorbing the opulence. Women wore elegant gowns that glittered in the soft lighting, their laughter like the delicate clink of crystal glasses. Men in sharp suits spoke in low, important voices, discussing business deals and political strategies. It felt like an entirely different world, a world filled with endless wealth and hidden secrets beneath polite smiles. At one point, as I walked down a hallway toward the kitchen, something unexpectedly caught my attention, a photograph hanging in a fancy black frame on the wall. I stopped abruptly, my heart suddenly pounding. The picture showed a little girl, maybe 5 years old, with long dark hair pulled into pigtails and wide, curious eyes. My stomach dropped as I stared at it. That little girl, it was me. It seemed impossible, but I knew it was true. The dress, the hairstyle, I remembered them clearly from an old photo I'd seen long ago, from a time in my life that I barely recalled. "Why is this here?" I whispered, my breathing becoming shallow as confusion overtook me. Shaking my head, I forced myself to keep moving. I couldn't afford to lose my focus, not tonight, not in this place. But the image stayed burned into my mind, stirring up questions about everything I thought I knew about my past. How could my childhood photo be in the home of the Harrington family, people I had never even met? Throughout the rest of the evening, an uneasy feeling gripped me. I tried to push it away and concentrate on my work, but the questions kept flooding my thoughts. Who exactly were the Harringtons, and why did they have my childhood picture? As guests gradually began to leave, I found myself back in the same hallway, staring again at that mysterious portrait. I knew I needed answers, though I had no clue how to find them. With effort, I turned away from the photo and headed back into the main event area, which still buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and music. But my thoughts were elsewhere, consumed by endless questions. How had my photo ended up in this mansion? Who put it there and why? I continued mechanically, serving drinks, smiling politely, and staying in the background among the wealthy elite. Every moment my thoughts wandered, they circled back to that haunting picture. Clearly, there was some hidden connection between me and the Harrington family, a connection I had never dreamed possible. My heart raced, and anxiety gnawed at me, making it almost impossible to concentrate. As the night drew on, I found myself carefully studying each of the Harrington family members, desperate for any clue. I hadn't directly met the Harringtons, but I could easily pick them out from the crowd. They carried themselves with an unmistakable air of confidence that only comes from generations of wealth and privilege. They moved gracefully through the room, chatting lightly with their guests, but always maintaining a subtle distance, as if they existed slightly above everyone else. At the heart of this group was Charles Harrington, the family's patriarch. His presence was commanding, impossible to overlook. With his chiseled features and neatly combed silver hair, he exuded authority that made everyone around him stand straighter. Charles Harrington was clearly someone who commanded respect and probably instilled fear in those closest to him. I'd heard plenty of rumors about Charles over the years, stories about how ruthless he was in business and how he'd built his empire using cutthroat tactics. Standing in the same room with him, though, made me feel there was something even darker beneath his polished exterior. A chill ran down my spine as my gaze lingered on him a bit too long. Just then, he caught my eye. For a brief second, our eyes met, and it felt as though he could see right through me. A cold, fleeting smile crossed his lips before he turned away, returning to his conversation with a group of distinguished guests. My heart raced as I quickly looked away. Did he recognize me? Was that why my picture hung in his mansion? Or was I just imagining things? Shaking off the uneasy feeling, I continued serving appetizers to the guests, but the questions kept nagging at me. I needed answers, and soon. As the night went on, I knew I couldn't just let this mystery go. I had to figure out why my childhood photo was hanging here, why I felt such a strange connection to this family I'd never met. By the time guests began leaving, I'd made up my mind. Approaching the Harringtons directly was too risky, especially if they were hiding something. Instead, I decided to ask the staff. If anyone knew this family's secrets, it would be those who worked quietly behind the scenes. As the event wrapped up and the last guests left, I headed into the kitchen, where other servers were already busy cleaning up. I spotted Martha, an older woman who had worked at the Harrington mansion for years. Martha was warm-hearted, always looking out for new staff members. If anyone had information, it was her. "Hey, Martha," I started cautiously. "Could I ask you something?" Martha paused from stacking dishes, wiping her hands clean on her apron. "Of course, dear. What's on your mind?" I hesitated, unsure how to phrase the question. "That picture in the hallway, the one of the little girl. Do you know anything about it?" It caught my eye and it just seemed familiar somehow. Martha's expression shifted slightly, revealing something I couldn't quite pinpoint. Maybe hesitation, maybe recognition. "Oh, that old thing," she replied casually, but her voice held a guarded note. "It's been there for as long as I remember." "Why do you ask?" I shrugged casually, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I'm not sure. It just seemed familiar, like I've seen it somewhere before." Martha studied me carefully, as if deciding how much to reveal. Finally, her voice dropped lower, quieter. The Harringtons have always been private about their past. There are things they prefer not to discuss, things that happened long before either of us worked here. It's probably best not to ask too many questions. My stomach tightened. Martha hadn't said it outright, but her message was clear. The Harrington family had secrets, and uncovering them could be dangerous. Still, I pressed on. "What kind of things?" I whispered. Martha glanced around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. "Years ago, there was a terrible tragedy. Some family members died in a horrible accident. The family never discusses it, especially not with the staff. But there have always been rumors that it wasn't entirely accidental. Be careful, Emily. The Harringtons protect their privacy fiercely." My pulse quickened. An accident, tragedy, secrecy, my picture somehow connected to this hidden past. It didn't add up yet, but I knew I was on the edge of something important. Thanking Martha, I returned to the ballroom to finish my duties, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only scratching the surface. Heading home from the Harrington mansion later that night, my mind raced. The portrait, Charla's strange smile, Martha's cryptic warning, all of it replayed in my mind relentlessly. By the time I reached my small apartment, the mystery weighed heavily on me, making it hard to breathe. My adoptive mother, Susan, was already asleep, so I moved quietly, careful not to wake her. Sitting at the kitchen table, I stared at the worn surface, my heart pounding with unease. Everything inside me urged caution, to let it go and stay away from the Harringtons' affairs. After all, who was I, a struggling waitress, to involve myself in the secrets of the rich and powerful? Yet, the pull to uncover the truth was impossible to ignore. This involved me, whether I liked it or not. The next day at work, I found myself distracted. The diner's noises, the clinking dishes, casual conversations felt distant. My mind was back at the mansion, obsessing over the Harringtons and their secrets. On my break, I quickly searched online for information about the Harrington family. Most results talked about their wealth, political influence, and various business ventures, but there wasn't much beyond that. Buried deep within news articles and social media posts, I stumbled upon something that sent chills down my spine, a headline from 20 years ago: "Tragic accident takes lives of Harrington family members." My hands trembled as I opened the brief article, just a few paragraphs long, but enough to confirm everything Martha had hinted at. The accident involved a car crash, killing 2 members of the Harrington family. There weren't many details, but what little I read made my heart stop. The victims were named Thomas and Elizabeth Harrington, a married couple. My eyes lingered on the screen, my mind spinning. The names were unfamiliar, yet something about them felt eerily connected to me. As I kept reading, a small detail at the end caught my attention. The couple is survived by their young daughter, Emily. The world around me seemed to spin. My breath caught in my throat as I reread the words over and over, trying desperately to grasp their meaning. Could this possibly be true? Could the accident Martha mentioned actually be the one that took my own parents' lives and led me to my adoptive mother? I hovered my fingers over my phone, uncertain of my next step. My stable, familiar life suddenly felt shaken, uncertain, and full of unanswered questions. Memories from childhood flashed through my mind, blurred images of faces I couldn't clearly recall and feelings of being out of place. I knew I wouldn't find clarity sitting here. There was only one place to go. That evening, I found myself back at the Harrington mansion. I had no solid plan, no idea what to say or do, but I couldn't rest until I knew the truth. As dusk fell, the mansion appeared even more imposing. Shadows stretched across the lawn like eerie fingers. Hesitation gripped me at the gate, my heart hammering. Suddenly, the intercom buzzed to life. "Can I help you?" asked an impatient, sharp voice. Swallowing hard, I spoke softly. "I need to speak with someone from the Harrington family. It's about something personal." After a brief pause, the gate slowly creaked open, allowing me entry. My legs felt heavy as I walked the long driveway, the mansion looming ominously ahead. Every step felt burdened by the weight of unanswered questions and my unknown past. At the entrance, a stern woman in her 50s greeted me, ushering me quietly into a small sitting room near the main hall. Anxiety knotted my stomach as I sat, fingers nervously twisting in my lap, aware of muffled voices and distant footsteps echoing through the mansion. After what seemed forever, the door opened, and Charles Harrington himself entered the room. Impeccably dressed, his silver hair neatly combed back, his gaze cold and penetrating. He said nothing at first, just observed me closely as though he could read my thoughts. "How may I help you, miss?" he finally asked, his voice calm but distant. My throat tightened, and all the rehearsed words evaporated. Finally, I saw a photograph of myself here, as a child. "I don't understand why it's here, and I need to know." Charles's expression didn't waver. He observed me thoughtfully, considering how much to reveal. Eventually, he offered a small, almost unnoticeable smile. "There's much you don't understand, Emily. Perhaps it's finally time you did." His words echoed loudly in my mind, sending chills down my spine. The room felt suddenly colder, tension growing as he continued to watch me. Every instinct urged me to leave immediately, yet I remained rooted to the spot, desperate for answers. He took a seat opposite me, his movements deliberate and calm, exuding a quiet authority. "I admit, seeing you at the event surprised me," he began evenly. "Though perhaps I shouldn't have been." This moment was bound to arrive. My stomach twisted nervously. "What moment?" I asked, barely louder than a whisper. Charles leaned back comfortably, crossing one leg over another. "Your return," he said clearly. "Whether you realize it or not, Emily, this is where you've always belonged." "What do you mean?" I demanded, confusion evident in my voice. "I don't know you. I've never met this family." His thin smile widened slightly. "But you have, you just don't remember." He paused, enjoying my confusion. "You are Emily Harrington, daughter of Thomas and Elizabeth Harrington, my niece." Shock froze me in place, robbing me of breath. My mind scrambled to comprehend what had just revealed. "No, that's impossible," I murmured shakily. "I was adopted as a baby. My birth parents, they died when I was very young." Charles's smile vanished, replaced by a colder, more serious look. "Indeed, they died tragically in a car crash. But you survived and were taken from us." He tilted his head, watching closely for my reaction. "Haven't you ever wondered how you ended up with your adoptive family?" I stared back blankly, overwhelmed. "I never thought about it. I just assumed that you were unwanted," Charles finished firmly. "But that couldn't be further from the truth. You were greatly wanted, Emily, and not only by your family." My pulse quickened, alarm rising at the dangerous undertone in his words. "What do you mean?" I whispered. Charles leaned closer, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "After the accident, complications arose. Certain individuals sought control of your family's wealth and power. They claimed they took you away to protect you. But I suspected there were other motives involved." A cold chill ran through me as I asked, "What kind of motives?" "Power," Charles replied smoothly, as if stating an obvious fact. "Control. When your parents died, it left a void. Some saw it as an opportunity to step in. By keeping you hidden, they prevented the Harrington legacy from passing to its rightful heir." My head spun with confusion. Could this truly be real? Had I really been part of the Harrington family this entire time? None of it made sense. Why had no one ever told me? Why had I grown up believing I was just another orphan? I studied Charles carefully, trying to read his expression. He appeared calm, almost too calm, as if he'd carefully orchestrated this conversation and knew exactly what he was doing. "You're saying I'm supposed to be part of this family?" My voice shook slightly. "Precisely," Charles affirmed smoothly. "You are the last true Harrington heir." My mind raced, struggling to grasp the enormity of what he was telling me. My entire life had been a constant battle just to survive, and now he was saying I was heir to an immense fortune and legacy I never even knew existed. Yet something about Charles unsettled me deeply. He was too composed, too calculated. It felt like he was hiding something more. "If that's true," I started slowly, "why didn't you look for me? Why not find me sooner?" His expression remained unchanged, but a shadow flickered in his eyes. "It wasn't that simple. There were obstacles, people who didn't want you found. Like who? I pressed. Charles' thin smile returned, though it never touched his eyes. You'll have to uncover that for yourself. But I'll tell you this, your parents' deaths were no ordinary accident. Forces were at work that led to their demise, and you were hidden because someone feared what you might become. My heart pounded furiously, his words pressing heavily upon me. Was he suggesting my parents were murdered, that I'd been hidden to protect some mysterious legacy? I don't understand, I whispered shakily. Who would do that? Who would want to hurt my family? Charles stood, adjusting his suit jacket calmly. The truth is complicated, Emily. But one thing is certain. Your parents didn't die accidentally. If you truly want answers, you'll need to explore deeper into your past. My fingers tightened around the arms of my chair as I struggled to process everything. It felt unreal, like I'd stepped into a nightmare. Yet the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. The photo, the whispers, the strange feelings I'd carried my entire life. All of it hinted at something bigger than I'd ever imagined. Charles walked toward the door, pausing briefly. It'll give you some time to process. Just remember, the Harrington family has enemies. If you're to survive, you'll need to choose your actions wisely. With that, he left, quietly shutting the door behind him. I sat in stunned silence, thoughts racing wildly. My entire reality had been shattered. I was a Harrington. My parents had been murdered. Now I was expected to shoulder a legacy I didn't understand. As the shock slowly faded, anger surged through me. I'd been lied to, manipulated, and kept in ignorance my entire life. If what Charles said was true, someone had stolen my parents from me and the life I was meant to have. Standing on shaky legs, I realized I couldn't fully trust Charles. There were too many secrets still hidden. But I wasn't backing down. If someone had murdered my parents, I'd uncover who and hold them accountable. Sleep was impossible that night, my mind overwhelmed by endless questions and tangled emotions. The weight of Charles' revelations felt suffocating. I'd lived my entire life believing I was ordinary, disconnected from any wealth or power. Now, in mere hours, everything had changed. As dawn filtered through my window, my decision was clear. I couldn't just sit idle with this knowledge, I had to uncover more. Charles had his own agenda, and I couldn't trust him completely. To discover the truth about my parents, I'd have to investigate myself. By the time I left my apartment, I had the start of a plan. I needed details about the accident that killed my parents, the event that set everything in motion. Charles implied it wasn't merely an accident. There were deeper forces at play, though had given me no specifics. If I could find the original police records or news reports, perhaps I'd uncover clues. Heading to the local library, where they kept archived newspapers and old records, seemed my only viable option. As I walked along the quiet streets, Charles' calm, unsettling demeanor echoed in my thoughts. Had always known my identity, yet had never sought me out. Why? What had stopped him? Upon reaching the library, I wasted no time. I approached the reference desk and asked about accessing the archives, doing my best to keep my voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside me. The librarian, a kindly older woman, smiled warmly and directed me toward a quiet corner in the back where they kept old newspaper reels. I thanked her and quickly made my way over, my heart beating loudly in my ears. Sitting down in front of the viewing screen, I began searching for articles from around the time of my parents' deaths. It didn't take long to find exactly what I needed. A bold headline from 20 years ago immediately stood out: Harrington family tragedy, fatal car accident claims lives of prominent couple. My fingers shook slightly as I clicked the link, watching as details filled the screen. According to the report, Thomas and Elizabeth Harrington had been returning from a charity event when their vehicle veered off a winding road just outside Chicago, plunging into a ravine. Both had died instantly. The official report mentioned nothing suspicious, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. Charles had been far too insistent there was more to the story. I continued scrolling, desperate for more information. Each article, however, repeated the same narrative: tragic accident, prominent victims, and no survivors other than their young daughter, who had been sent to live with relatives afterward. My heart skipped a beat. If I was truly the only survivor, why had I ended up with an entirely unrelated adoptive family? Where had the Harringtons been all these years, and why hadn't they tried to find me earlier? Just as frustration started to set in, I spotted a small article buried within a gossip column, dated a few weeks after the incident. Speculation surrounds Harrington Estate. Will the fortune be contested? My eyes widened as I read further. It was filled with vague suggestions of internal family conflict over the inheritance left by my parents. The piece hinted at a struggle for power, implying various factions had emerged, each wanting control over the family's considerable wealth and influence. Though the article didn't provide specific names, I couldn't help but suspect Charles Harrington's involvement. Had he orchestrated control over the Harrington fortune after my parents died? And if so, had he purposely hidden me away to keep a firm grip on the family legacy? My head spun with the possibilities. Everything pointed toward Charles, yet without concrete proof, I remained trapped in speculation. Leaning back, I rubbed my temples as the magnitude of what I was uncovering pressed down heavily upon me. If Charles had manipulated the events following my parents' deaths, what else could he be capable of? Could he have been directly involved in their deaths? The thought was terrifying but impossible to dismiss. Standing up suddenly, pulse racing, I knew I needed more concrete information. But I couldn't handle this alone. Charles was powerful, influential, and potentially dangerous. I'd have to tread carefully. Remembering Martha, who seemed to know something about the Harrington family's secrets, I decided she might be my best lead. Maybe she'd been holding back during our previous conversation. With renewed determination, I left the library and headed straight back to the Harrington mansion. I needed to speak with Martha again, armed this time with a clearer understanding of what I was searching for. The wind picked up as I walked, rustling leaves and sending chills down my spine. I couldn't shake the sense that the deeper I dug, the more dangerous this would become. By the time I reached the mansion, dusk had fallen, casting shadows across the sprawling estate. My heart pounded heavily as I stood before the intimidating gates. This wasn't a casual inquiry anymore. This was about uncovering the truth, no matter what it cost. Taking a deep breath, I pressed the intercom button at the gate. The seconds stretched into an agonizing eternity until a familiar, impatient voice finally answered. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak with Mr. Harrington," I replied, doing my best to sound steady. There was a long pause. "Do you have an appointment?" My fists clenched involuntarily. "No, but it's important. I'm family." Silence lingered heavily before the gate slowly buzzed open. Steeling myself, I walked up the long driveway, each step feeling heavier, as if the truth itself were resisting my approach. At the mansion's entrance, a butler awaited, holding the door open with a neutral expression. "Right this way, miss," he said calmly. Inside, the lavish interior I'd seen before now felt oppressive, the grandeur hiding sinister secrets. The butler led me to the same sitting room where I'd spoken with Charles previously. Its cold elegance and suffocating silence were unchanged. "Mr. Harrington will join you shortly," he informed me politely, leaving me alone. Minutes ticked by slowly, and my resolve grew stronger. I wouldn't let Charles manipulate me again. This time, I demanded the real truth, and I was ready to confront him fully. The door finally opened, and Charles stepped in, his expression carrying a new edge, a hint of annoyance in his eyes. Closing the door behind him, he approached deliberately. "Emily," he began smoothly, though irritation tinged his voice. "I wasn't expecting to see you again quite so soon. What brings you here tonight?" Charles asked, his voice carefully controlled. I met his gaze firmly, refusing to show any fear. "I've been doing some research," I began, my voice steady despite my nerves, about my parents and the accident. Charles raised an eyebrow, his expression neutral but watchful. "And what exactly did you discover?" "Their deaths weren't accidental," I asserted, growing stronger with each word. There was more going on. Someone deliberately prevented me from inheriting what was rightfully mine. His eyes flickered briefly with surprise or perhaps irritation, quickly masked by a polite smile. "You've been busy," he said calmly, almost amused. "I warned you. Digging into the past can be dangerous." Ignoring his subtle threat, I pushed forward. "You knew who I was all along. You knew I was your niece, yet you let me live my whole life believing I was nobody. Why didn't you tell me the truth sooner?" Charles sighed as though slightly inconvenienced. "Emily, there are complexities you simply don't understand." "No," I interrupted, standing up abruptly. "I understand perfectly. You kept me hidden to ensure you retained control of the Harrington fortune. You wanted me to remain in the dark so I'd never claim what's rightfully mine." His smile faded into something cold, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Be careful, Emily. These are serious accusations." "I'm not afraid of you," I shot back defiantly. "I'm here for answers, and I'm not leaving without them." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing sharply, revealing the true Charles Harrington beneath his polished exterior, someone far more dangerous. His voice became a quiet threat, precise and chilling. "The truth," he began slowly, "is far darker than you're ready to accept. Your parents didn't merely die in an accident. They got involved in something beyond their control, something that attracted enemies willing to do anything to protect their own interests." My heart pounded rapidly. Who were these people? Who killed them? Charles's lips twisted into a cold, dark smile. "Your parents made powerful enemies. When they stood in their way, those enemies removed them from the picture." "Removed?" My voice was barely audible. "You mean they were murdered?" He didn't reply directly, but his silence and the look in his eyes answered everything. My knees weakened, and I gripped the back of the chair for support. My parents hadn't died accidentally, they were killed. Murdered. And Charles had known it all along. Disgust flooded through me. "And you did nothing," I accused, voice trembling. "You let them die and took everything meant for me." Charles's expression darkened further. "I did what was necessary to protect this family. You think you're entitled to the Harrington fortune? You don't even comprehend what it means to carry our name, the responsibility, the sacrifice." I stepped back, shaking my head vehemently. "You don't care about the family. You only care about yourself." His eyes flashed angrily. "Do you honestly think you can take everything from me? Just walk in and claim what's yours?" His voice dropped dangerously low. "I've spent my life building this legacy. I won't let you ruin it." A surge of fear rose within me, but I stood my ground. "I'm not here to destroy anything, I just want the truth." Charles sneered coldly. "The truth is, your parents were weak. They didn't understand the power they wielded, and that weakness cost them their lives. If you hope to survive, you'll have to be smarter." My blood boiled at his words. "I'm nothing like you, Charles." He smiled cruelly. "We'll see." Without another word, he turned and left the room, closing the door behind him. I stood motionless, heart racing. I had found my answers, but at a cost I hadn't fully anticipated. My parents had been murdered, and Charles had allowed it to happen. Still trembling, I stepped into the grand hallway of the mansion. The confrontation had shaken me deeply. The mansion itself felt colder now, oppressive, filled with dark secrets. I moved quickly toward the exit, desperate to clear my head, but paused at the door. Something Martha had said earlier replayed in my mind, the secrets, whispers of conspiracy. Charles confirmed part of it. But who were these powerful enemies he spoke of, and what exactly was his role? Clenching my fists, I realized I couldn't walk away yet. I had to speak with Martha again. She'd been cautious before, but now I had more information. Perhaps she'd finally open up. Determined, I turned back into the mansion, heading to the kitchen where I knew she'd be finishing her tasks. The halls felt strangely silent, the guests long departed, leaving only echoes of uncertainty. I found Martha wiping down counters, her face weary. Seeing me, she smiled faintly. "Emily, I thought you'd left already." Stepping closer, I lowered my voice urgently. "Martha, I need to talk. It's about the Harringtons, the accident." Her eyes narrowed slightly, caution returning. "Emily, I told you." "I know what you said," I interrupted firmly. but I've learned more. Charles admitted my parents were murdered. Martha's expression froze, her hands motionless. The air grew tense with unspoken truths, and I knew we were about to uncover something even deeper. For a moment, the kitchen was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. Then Martha let out a long, weary sigh, her shoulders sagging. "I was afraid of this," she murmured softly. My chest tightened. "You knew, didn't you, about what happened to my parents?" Martha nodded slowly, her gaze drifting downward. "I didn't know everything, but I suspected enough. There were always rumors among the staff. People whispered the accident was no accident at all, that your parents were deliberately removed from the picture." I swallowed hard, feeling sick. "By Charles?" She hesitated, then shook her head slightly. "I don't know if Charles directly orchestrated it, but I know he benefited enormously. After your parents died, he immediately seized control of the family's wealth and influence. Others stood to gain too, but Charles was always at the center of everything, pulling the strings." A wave of nausea rose in my stomach. I'd suspected this, but hearing Martha confirm my fears made the reality brutally clear. Charles had manipulated events to solidify his control over the Harrington fortune. Meanwhile, I'd been left to grow up unaware of my true identity, oblivious to the threats surrounding me. Who else was involved? My voice dropped to a shaky whisper. Who wanted my parents dead? Martha looked uncomfortable, her eyes anxious. Your father had many rivals, businessmen he crossed, enemies he made, but there was another person, someone closer to the family. My heart quickened. Who? She glanced nervously toward the door, lowering her voice further. Your Uncle Charles always ensured people's loyalty, but someone else stood to gain significantly from your parents' deaths. Someone who was supposed to protect you. My brow furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? Her voice dropped even lower. Your parents had a close friend, someone they deeply trusted. He was designated as your guardian should anything happen to them. But after their deaths, he vanished entirely. Rumors spread that Head made a deal with Charles, paid off to remain silent and disappear. My pulse raced frantically. Who was he? Who was this man? Martha looked away, her voice strained. Edgar Barnes. He was your father's business partner and was legally appointed your guardian after your parents died. But shortly after their deaths, he disappeared without a trace. My mind spun rapidly. Edgar Barnes, a name completely unfamiliar to me yet seemingly central to everything. If Head been my father's partner and my guardian, surely he held the answers I desperately needed. But if he vanished, how would I ever find him? Martha, do you have any idea where Edgar could be? My voice was desperate. She shook her head regretfully. I don't. There were whispers that Head fled overseas, hiding out of fear for his life. Many believed he left because of Charles. My stomach churned. The scope of this conspiracy was larger than I'd ever imagined. Charles wasn't just after control, he'd orchestrated everything, removing anyone who stood in his way, silencing all threats. Now, the one man who might have answers was missing, perhaps permanently. Why didn't anyone do anything? My voice cracked with emotion. Why didn't someone stop Charles? Martha's expression softened, her eyes filled with sympathy. Charles is powerful, Emily. He has connections everywhere, people who fear him deeply. No one dared stand against him. I clenched my fists tightly, anger building rapidly inside me. I'm not afraid. I'll uncover the truth, and I'll make him pay. Martha gently touched my arm, her eyes full of concern. Be careful, Emily. Charles isn't someone to confront lightly. If pushed, he won't hesitate to protect himself by any means necessary. Meeting her gaze, determination surged through me. I don't care. I have to do this for my parents. Martha nodded slowly, her expression sad yet understanding. I know. Just promise you'll be careful. I gave her a grateful, solemn smile. I promise. As I left the kitchen and headed out of the mansion, my mind raced with new urgency. Edgar Barnes was the key, the missing puzzle piece. If I could track him down, perhaps I'd finally uncover the truth about my parents' murder and Charles's involvement. Outside, The night air was cool and crisp, sharpening my resolve. But a growing sense of dread lingered beneath my determination. Charles had spent years constructing layers of lies and manipulation, eliminating anyone who threatened him. Walking home, my thoughts circled relentlessly around Edgar Barnes. Where had he gone? What did he know? If Charles had truly forced him into hiding, finding him would be dangerous and difficult, but necessary. Approaching my apartment building, I immediately sensed something off. The street was unusually quiet, and a black car ID never seen before sat parked nearby. A chill ran down my spine as my instincts screamed danger. She slowed her steps, glancing cautiously over her shoulder. The car remained still, but she felt eyes watching her closely. Briefly, she considered continuing past her building, but realized it wouldn't matter. Whoever was observing already knew exactly where she lived. My heart raced as I approached my front door, fumbling nervously with the keys. My hands trembled as I unlocked it and slipped inside, quickly securing it behind me. Pressing my back against the door, I stood still in the darkness, trying to steady my breathing. Charles knew. He must have discovered I'd been digging into the past. The black car, the eerie quietness, it was clearly a warning. He wanted me to understand I was getting too close and wouldn't allow me to continue without resistance. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed a clear head and a plan. Carefully, I double-checked the locks on all the doors and windows. It was obvious I couldn't stay here if Charles' people were already watching. I needed somewhere to lay low and think about my next move. But where could I go and who could I trust? My thoughts immediately went to Martha, but I quickly dismissed the idea. She had already risked enough by sharing what she knew. Involving her further would put her in danger. I couldn't let that happen. Then I thought of David, my trusted friend from the diner. We'd known each other for years, and he understood the city better than anyone. If there was someone I could rely on to keep me safe, it would be him. Grabbing my phone, I dialed David's number, hands still shaking slightly. It rang several times before he answered sleepily, his voice warm but concerned. Hey Emily, is everything all right? David, I need your help, I said urgently. I can't explain everything right now, but I need somewhere safe to stay. There was a short pause. Safe? What's happening, Emily? Are you in trouble? I hesitated, not wanting to drag him into my mess. It's complicated, but yes, I can't stay at my place tonight. Can I come over? Absolutely, he answered without hesitation. Come over right away. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Relief surged through me. Thank you, David. I'll be there soon. I hung up, quickly packed a small overnight bag, and cautiously left my apartment, keeping my head low as I walked past the suspicious black car. Even without looking directly at it, I felt the weight of its occupant's gaze. My heart raced as I hurried down the street, making my way swiftly to David's apartment nearby. The streets were unusually quiet and unsettling, each small noise amplifying my anxiety. The feeling of being followed persisted, even though I saw no one behind me. When I finally reached David's place, I exhaled with relief. He was waiting anxiously at the door, quickly ushering me inside. Emily, what's happening? He asked, concern evident in his eyes. You look like you've seen a ghost. I might as well have, I muttered, stepping into the reassuring warmth of his apartment. It's a long story, David. A really complicated one. He nodded gently, guiding me to the couch. Take your time. Whatever's going on, we'll handle it. Sitting down, I took a shaky breath, overwhelmed by everything I'd uncovered recently. David, I'm in trouble, I confessed quietly. It's about my real family. His expression grew serious as he sat beside me. Your real family? What do you mean? Slowly, I explained everything, the Harringtons, the suspicious accident that killed my parents, and Charles' involvement. I recounted the secrets I'd uncovered and described the imminent danger I now faced. David listened intently, eyes widening in shock. Emily, this is huge. Are you sure about all this? Unfortunately, yes, I admitted quietly. And now Charles's people are watching me. There's a black car parked outside my place. I'm certain it's them. He sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. You can definitely stay here, but you'll need more than just shelter. If Charles is after you, you'll need a solid plan. I know, I said firmly. I have to find Edgar Barnes. He's the key to taking Charles down. David nodded decisively. Then we'll find him. And we'll make sure you're protected. A wave of gratitude washed over me. With David's help, I felt stronger, though I knew the risks ahead were great. The next morning, I woke up in David's comfortable apartment, dawn gently illuminating the room. For the first time in days, ID managed a night without nightmares. Yet, reality quickly returned. I wasn't safe yet. Sitting up, I heard David in the kitchen, likely preparing coffee. His support reaffirmed my choice in coming here. But now wasn't the time to relax. Charles was undoubtedly preparing his next move, and I needed to be ready. Pulling on my shoes, I walked into the kitchen. David stood by the stove, carefully stirring a pot of coffee, his presence reassuring amid the uncertainty ahead. He looked up as I entered, giving me a reassuring smile. "Morning," he greeted, handing me a steaming mug. "Figured you could use some caffeine." "Thanks," I said gratefully, wrapping my fingers around the warm cup. "Definitely needed." David poured his own coffee and leaned casually against the counter, his expression serious. "So, what's our next move?" I took a thoughtful sip, considering my options. "We have to find Edgar Barnes. He's the only one who can reveal the full truth about my parents. If I can get him to talk, maybe I can finally expose Charles." He nodded slowly, taking it in. "Martha mentioned Barnes disappeared after your parents died, right? Went into hiding?" "Yeah," I confirmed. "She said there were rumors he'd left the country because he feared what Charles might do if he stayed." David furrowed his brow. "So we're searching for someone who could literally be anywhere. Not exactly an easy task." I sighed, running a frustrated hand through my hair. True, but there must be some kind of trail. If Edgar was my father's business partner, he couldn't vanish without leaving a trace. He set his mug down, thoughtful. Maybe there's someone else from their past, someone who knew Barnes and might have clues about where he went. My mind raced as I considered his suggestion. It made sense. There had to be someone who knew Edgar well enough to point us in the right direction. I remember hearing my father mention someone named Victor Callahan. He was a close friend and business associate. If anyone knows what happened to Edgar, it would be him. David raised an eyebrow. "Victor Callahan, that sounds familiar. Isn't he some prominent businessman around town?" "Yes," I said, nodding. I don't remember many details, but I know he and my father were close. He immediately grabbed his phone, typing quickly. "Let's see what we can dig up about him." I watched anxiously as David searched online, my heart racing. Finally, he turned the phone towards me, showing a distinguished-looking man in his 50s standing in front of a luxury high-rise office. "Here he is," David announced. "Victor Callahan, CEO of a finance firm downtown. Seems he's still in business." Staring at the image, I felt hope and anxiety clash within me. If Victor truly knew my father well, maybe he'd help me find Edgar. But what if he was involved in Charles' schemes? What if he had his own reasons for silence? "I have to speak with him," I decided firmly. "He's my best chance at locating Edgar Barnes." David looked worried. "Are you sure that's wise? Approaching someone close to Charles might put a target on your back." Taking a deep breath, I weighed the risks. David was right, this could backfire. But I knew I had no other choice. "I have to do this," I insisted. "If I don't, Charles gets away with everything. I need Victor's help, and I need it soon." David nodded reluctantly, still concerned. "All right, just promise you'll be cautious. We don't know who Charles has watching." "I promise," I reassured him, determined. "But I can't run anymore. I have to confront this." We spent the next hour carefully planning my approach to Victor Callahan. Walking directly into his office was risky, especially if I was being watched. Instead, David suggested calling his office under the guise of a business inquiry, something credible enough to secure a meeting without raising suspicion. Once inside, I'd find a way to speak privately. By the time our plan was set, I felt more prepared, though anxiety lingered. I knew the risks but felt stronger with David's support. Later that afternoon, my hand trembled slightly as I dialed Victor Callahan's office number. A calm, professional receptionist answered, and I quickly explained my interest in discussing a potential business opportunity, a half-truth sufficient enough to gain access. She transferred me to Callahan's assistant, who promptly arranged a meeting for the next day. Hanging up, I exhaled deeply, pulse racing. Securing the meeting was just the first step. Now I'd have to face Victor directly, seeking the truth about my parents, Edgar Barnes, and Charles Roll. The rest of the day passed with David and me rehearsing every possible scenario. No matter how prepared I was, nothing could fully ready me for confronting someone who might hold critical answers. Sleep was elusive that night as fears, doubts, and possibilities consumed my thoughts. The image of the black car near my apartment, the feeling of Charles' threats, it all haunted me. Yet, determination surged beneath the fear. I'd come too far to turn back now. Tomorrow would be pivotal. The next morning came faster than expected. I stood outside the sleek, glass-covered building housing Callahan's finance firm, heart pounding with nerves and anticipation. The sun glistened off the polished windows, and the busy city buzzed around me, oblivious to the importance of this moment. I spent the night replaying our plan repeatedly, but nothing truly prepared me for the moment itself. David had insisted on driving me, offering both moral support and protection. He parked several blocks away, maintaining a low profile but close enough to provide reassurance. "Are you sure you're ready?" David asked as I stepped out of his car. I nodded firmly, despite the nerves twisting inside me. I have to be. Now, standing before the imposing glass doors, I inhaled deeply and walked into Victor Callahan's sleek office building. Inside, polished marble floors and modern decor greeted me, creating an intimidating atmosphere. The receptionist smiled politely, already expecting me. "Miss Harrington, Mr. Callahan is ready for you," she said in a practiced, professional tone. I returned a strained smile, following an assistant who appeared promptly to escort me upstairs. Each step made my heart pound louder, but I kept my expression composed, determined not to show weakness. At the top floor, the assistant guided me into a spacious office surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Victor Callahan sat behind an elegant mahogany desk, exactly as I remembered from his online photos, tall, distinguished, with an aura of unmistakable authority. He glanced up briefly, giving me a polite nod. "Miss Harrington," he greeted smoothly, "please, have a seat." I swallowed my anxiety, settling into the plush chair opposite him, maintaining steady eye contact. His gaze was sharp, analytical, and slightly distant, clearly a man who valued precision and control. "I admit I was surprised by your request," Victor began cautiously. "I hadn't realized the Harrington family still maintained business interests here." "I'm not here for business," I stated directly. "I'm looking for answers." Victor raised an eyebrow slightly, intrigued. "Answers regarding what, exactly?" "About my parents, the accident that took their lives," I explained firmly. "I know it wasn't an accident, and I suspect you do as well." A brief flash of surprise crossed his eyes before he quickly regained his composure. "Their deaths were a tragedy," he said evenly. "But I know only what's been publicly reported. They were close friends, and their loss was deeply felt." "I'm not interested in official stories," I pressed, leaning forward intently. "I know there's more. I know Charles was involved, and I know you disappeared after they died." Victor's posture stiffened subtly, revealing discomfort. "I had reasons for stepping back," he responded carefully. "There were complications, situations beyond my control." "You knew what Charles was doing," I challenged sharply. "You knew about the conspiracy, and you allowed him to push me out and claim everything for himself." His eyes narrowed slightly, tension mounting in the silence that followed. Finally, he spoke quietly but pointedly. "Charles Harrington is dangerous. If you're wise, you'll stop digging and walk away now." My pulse quickened, but I refused to back down. "I'm not walking away. I want the truth." Victor sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead as though burdened by the weight of his words. "Your father was a good man," he began cautiously. "But he made enemies, powerful ones. Charles wasn't the only person who gained from your parents' deaths, though he certainly benefited the most. And you protected me by vanishing? I countered angrily, feeling betrayed. Leaving me to be adopted by strangers while Charles took everything? Victor looked away briefly, guilt evident in his expression. I was given a choice, he admitted quietly. Disappear or suffer the same fate as your parents. The breath caught in my throat. So you did know, I whispered accusingly. Victor's silence confirmed everything. He had known the truth and chosen self-preservation. Where's Edgar Barnes? I asked abruptly, changing the subject sharply. Victor blinked in surprise at the sudden shift. Edgar Barnes? Yes, I insisted. My father's business partner, my intended guardian. He disappeared too. I need to find him. Victor hesitated, visibly conflicted. Eventually, he spoke in a low voice. I don't know his exact location. Last I heard, he was living in South America, using a different identity. After your parents died, Charles ensured he disappeared for good. My heart raced with new determination. South America was vague, but it was more than I had before. Victor leaned back, looking resigned, clearly weary from revisiting these painful truths. You're playing a dangerous game, Emily. Charles won't let you take him down without a fight. I don't care, I replied firmly. I'm going to expose him, no matter what it takes. Victor sighed deeply, looking at me with a mixture of pity and respect. Then I wish you luck. You're going to need it. I stood up, my heart pounding heavily as I left Victor's office. I had what I needed. Edgar Barnes was still alive, and now I had a solid lead on his whereabouts. However, as I stepped onto the bustling city streets, dread crept in. Charles would soon realize how close I was getting to the truth. When he did, he would come after me with everything he had. But fear no longer held me back. I spent far too long hiding from my past, running away from reality. Now, I was prepared to fight for my parents, for myself, and for the justice that had long been denied. Sliding back into David's car, I turned to him with steady resolve. We're going to South America. 2 weeks had passed since David and I arrived in South America in search of Edgar Barnes. It had been a long and uncertain journey, but finally, we stood before a modest, secluded house nestled in the hills outside a small, quiet village. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the lush landscape. My heart raced as I stared at the weathered wooden door. This was it, the culmination of our search, the sleepless nights, and all the danger we'd encountered. We were about to confront the one man who could unlock the truth. David stood by my side, his hand reassuringly on my shoulder. We'd faced so much together, and I was deeply grateful for his unwavering support. Yet this moment was mine alone. I had to face Edgar Barnes myself and demand answers. Are you ready? David asked softly. I nodded, my determination solidifying. Yes. Taking a deep breath, I knocked firmly on the door. The sound echoed softly in the quiet evening, followed by a moment of tense silence. Slowly, the door creaked open, revealing an older man with gray hair and weary eyes, who looked at us with suspicion. Can I help you? He asked cautiously. My throat tightened. This was Edgar Barnes, my father's friend, the man who'd vanished after my parents' deaths. For a moment, words failed me. I'm Emily Harrington, I finally said, my voice trembling slightly. Thomas and Elizabeth Harrington were my parents. Edgar's expression shifted instantly, his eyes widening in shock as though seeing a ghost. He stepped back, gripping the doorframe for support. Emily, he whispered, barely audible. I nodded, my heart pounding loudly. I've been looking for you. I need to know what happened to my parents and why you disappeared. I know Charles Harrington was involved, I know he benefited from their deaths. But I need the entire truth. Edgar's face grew pale, glancing nervously behind him. You shouldn't be here, he said urgently. It's not safe. I don't care, I said firmly, stepping forward. I've come too far to turn back now. Please, tell me what happened. Edgar stared at me, guilt and regret clouding his expression. Finally, he sighed deeply, stepping aside. Come in. David glanced at me worriedly, but I nodded confidently, and we entered Edgar's modest, dimly lit home. The interior smelled of old wood and dust, the walls lined with overflowing bookshelves and piles of documents. It was clear he'd been isolated for years, hiding from the world. He motioned for us to sit at a small table, settling into a chair opposite us, his hands trembling. "I knew this day would come," Edgar said wearily. "I always knew you'd eventually find me." I leaned forward, eyes locked onto his. "Why did you disappear? You were supposed to be my guardian. Why did you abandon me?" Edgar sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. "I didn't have a choice, Emily. After your parents died, everything changed. Charles made sure of it." "What do you mean?" I pressed sharply. Pain flickered in Edgar's eyes. "Your father and I were business partners, yes, but also close friends. Thomas trusted me completely, even naming me your guardian. But after the accident, Charles took control. He twisted the law, made threats." "How did he threaten you?" David interjected, concerned. Edgar glanced at him briefly, then back at me. "Charles made it clear if I challenged him, fought for custody, or tried to reveal the truth, I'd share your parents' fate. He had powerful connections, people willing to silence any opposition. So I ran and hid, hoping staying invisible would keep me alive." My heart sank deeply. "So you let him take everything. You allowed him to control my family's fortune and my life." Edgar's expression was pained. "I'm truly sorry, Emily. I thought by staying away, I was protecting you. I believed Charles wouldn't bother you if I was out of the picture." Anger surged within me. He still came after me, manipulating, threatening, because I was too close to the truth. "I know," Edgar said regretfully. "I should have done more." Taking a steadying breath, I controlled my anger. I finally had the answers I'd sought, though the pain was fresh. "There's one more thing," I said quietly. "Martha, a staff member at the mansion, mentioned something. She hinted my mother might still be alive." Edgar's eyes widened dramatically. "What? That can't be true. Your mother." "She survived," I interrupted, voice trembling. "Charles had her hidden away, memory lost, but alive." Edgar stared at me, disbelief mingling with hope. "I never knew," he whispered. "I thought she was gone." Standing, determination filled my heart. "I have to find her and bring her back." David stood beside me, supportive and resolute. "We'll find her, Emily. We'll stop Charles from hiding her anymore." Edgar's gaze turned resolute. "Then you'll need my help." "I've been hiding, yes, but I still have connections, people who can help you find your mother." Relief flooded through me. For the first time, I felt truly supported. Together, we would expose Charles, rescue my mother, and finally end the Harrington family's legacy of lies and deceit.